I'm Moji, and you're listening to the Right on Track podcast. Free the roads for real tyranny!
Greetings, one and all. Do not change your podcast feed. This is not a hallucination. Welcome to the Right on Track podcast, episode 68. My name's Tom Denham, and I'm one of the original the trio who brought you this podcast. Now, I do have to apologise. It's been a very long time. I also have to apologise for the background noise. I live very close to an airport in my new apartment, so we've got that to compete with, but we're going to keep going. I do have to apologise for how long it's been in between episodes. The matter of the fact is that myself, Connor, Parry, Lachlan, and others all live very busy lives, and we work, we study. But before that out of the way, we're here. We've got a brand new spanking episode of Right on Track to wrap your ears around. It's going to be great, and we've got some great content lined up for you. One of the reasons these episodes take so long to put together, in contrast to series 1 to 7, is that there's so many highly produced segments, and we've figured out that this has become quite difficult, and so we may return to something a bit more familiar when we get to series 9, but we've still got a little bit of series 8 to go. And we needed all the manpower we could get, so I relied on some of my friends. You may know them as CalleyFan and Steam-Powered Cyborg, and they're going to be reviewing 2 more episodes of Series 8.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Right on Track. This is something a little bit different because I'm not the host that you're used to. My name is Josh, also known as CalleyFan, and I am here with Christopher, Steam-Powered Cyborg. Hello.
Hello. And yeah, this is
how are
quite
you
strange
doing?
because, you'd think this was a completely different show, but yeah, this is kind of, how we'd say, a new era to the series, and they kind of brought us on because we're their friends. As you can tell, I am British, so some probably hate me already, but yes, I am this guy who just sounds way younger than he actually is, and I made this series called Thomas Rewritten. It's basically about rewriting a lot of the episodes from the Kid era, Nitrogen era, and I've been doing this for about 5 years. I've also do a bit of art and voice acting on the side, and yeah, I've been a lot of that ever since. So
It sounds like you're the perfect guest for today's episode and the episodes that we're discussing and a lot of the points that I have about them.
I'm not really going to be covering these episodes, to my knowledge, yet. Future me might be later on. Okay.
Fair enough. Well, again, like I say, I'm Josh, CalleyFan, probably best known for the series I did called Thomas Talk. And I also have a very popular Roblox Chuggington game. And
I was about to say, I kind of know you for a lot of your contributions to the Chuggington fandom. Chuggington's a brilliant show, so we won't have any slander in the audience. Thank you very much.
no, absolutely not. And I mean, I'm CalleyFan, Callie from Chuggington. That's where it comes from. So yeah, very thrilled to be taking part as kind of a guest host on Right on Track, filling in for the regular hosts. I believe there are some other guest hosts coming in as well, and we are all talking about Season 8. Oh, Season 8. Well, this is...
Yippee!
Exactly. This is a bit of a controversial one in the fandom as of late. There are a lot of people that feel nostalgic for the season, and that's fair enough. You know, it came out when I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I watched it as a kid.
I was about 6 when I watched it. Back then, I didn't really mind it. Thomas was Thomas. But as I got older, most of it, didn't really hold up. There's still some decent episodes in there. A lot of them in this season, mind you. But,
Well, that's true. The strongest hit episodes are probably in the 8th season. And you know what? In my opinion, we're starting off with one of the episodes that I think is actually one of the strongest of the hit era.
Oh, yeah, now you think about it. Yes, it is.
I think it's a really kind of fun episode. It is called Halloween. And in this episode, Thomas and Emily are tricked by 2 devious diesels on Halloween.
But when they got to the smelter's yard, it was very spooky. "Oh my," whispered Emily. "Oh dear," hissed Thomas. They puffed slowly through the piles of jagged steel and twisted scrap. The air grew hotter, and smoke grew thicker. Harry and Bert were lurking nearby. The 2 diesels saw the chance to scare a couple of steamies. When Thomas and Emily rolled by, they moaned and groaned. It sounded spooky. "What was that?" snapped Emily. "You said there was no such thing as ghosts." "Silly make-believe, you said," gasped Thomas. Suddenly a truck began to shudder and shake. "Cinders and ashes!" cried Thomas. "Help!" wailed Emily. "It's a ghost! Let's get away from here!" They didn't know Harry and Bert had been bumping the flatbed's buffers. The 2 naughty diesels were having great fun.
So you guys just heard a clip from the season 8 episode Halloween. Ooh.
Spooky.
You know what? I kind of remember this episode from when I was a kid, but I don't remember it too much. You know, it stands out to me now, but as a kid, I enjoyed the few times that I watched it, but it's not one of the more memorable ones for me.
Yeah, I do remember a couple of visuals from it. I do remember that the scene where Harry and Bert tease Thomas. I remember that beautiful sunset shot where Thomas and Emily go through. I remember the whole climax of the episode still. All the humorous bits.
You know, and it's probably the scariest episode of the 8th season as well. I mean, you've got that Scrap Gordon that goes by right off the top.
Yeah, it's got a very interesting combination of different parts. It looks, from the wiki, it seems to just be Gordon's body combined with Murdoch's chassis and City of Truo's tender. Something. For a while, I kind of had that, you know how some rail fans might know that Murdoch's class, the 9Fs, had a couple of members who had this certain steam valve, similar to something that I think Lorenzo of Bit Adventures had a basis, had this sort of reverse piston or steam valve. I can't remember for the life of me, but it didn't really have the smoke deflectors, and something about this sort of ghost engine, it kind of looks like a botched Dalby version of that engine.
Interesting. See, I didn't even pick up on what you're picking up on. Yeah, I just thought it was a Scrap Gordon. But it's creepy.
Yeah. It was just my imagination going a little wild. It tends to do that, so you'll see that in my series. But anyway, onto the episode.
Yeah, you know what? It's an episode that, to me, there are some shots in this that could very well be confused for season 7. Right? Like, season 8 is a very unique season.
Especially with the scrap lighting of the interior of the scrap yards.
No, those shots look straight out of season 7. right? And as a kid watching season 8 for the first time, even I recognized, oh, there are some changes here. They've made some key changes to the show. And it feels very different. Like the whole season feels very different than everything that came before it. As a kid, I kind of accepted seasons 1 to 7 as like, you know, that's one part of the show. And to me, there weren't a ton of differences, right? To me, it was just like, oh, it gets newer as it goes on. Season 8 was the season where like, no, this feels like a little bit of a different show. And I think this episode is one of the episodes that actually feels like it could fit in with the era that came before it. And the visuals to it are very, very unique and stand out to me as an adult.
I like a lot of the time they use the typical camera angles to their advantage. Like I think they use the very low at the bottom of at the very edge of the below the engine's camera angles pretty well in the chase scene. And speaking of the chase scene, I know that a lot of people do have their thoughts on the music from this era, and a lot of it doesn't really hit to me, but some of the tunes for the main characters do sound kind of nice for what they are. But the theme in the runaway scene in this episode, that is, when going back to this episode again, it was surprisingly kind of haunting, because when you get to the runaway, besides the usual very, very quiet in tempo for the most part violins, you also had this sort of very sudden dun sort of synths that do sound like the sorts that you'd hear in a few 80s songs. Like, the first one that comes to mind is the first few chords in Michael Jackson's Bad. I don't know, it sounds similar to that. You know, like the strikes that go before the do. But yeah, that's really just brings a very unique feel to this particular theme. Really brings the atmosphere to the episode. It's great.
No, there is a really good atmosphere. That's a good word, atmosphere, throughout this whole episode. And I'm glad that you brought up the shots, right? Because to me, the things that stand out here and kind of stand out in the 8th season is, you know, they're kind of just getting their footing, right, with it.
Yeah.
It's the first season to have Stephen Asquith as the full-time director on the series. And you can see that he's playing around with his angles a little bit. I love the shots that reveal Ari and Bert, right? That whole sequence, the way the camera moves it feels so unique to this episode. And they're types of angles and movements that we haven't really seen in the model series before. And the whole thing just feels really well put together, and it moves really well. It's engaging, you know, and part of it's, I don't think it would actually fit in. I know I said that it feels like it could fit in with the season 6 or 7 episodes. But I mean, it's still got some of the season 8 qualities to it. You know, it's still...
They are just developing in this season.
Yeah, and it's like it's going the direction that it ends up going in season 9, 10, 11. But it's kind of in this weird midway point, and I think this is a perfect episode to demonstrate that. You know, it's
our last bit of the typical... It's our last taste of what you'd call it's spooks and the haunted Henrys that we'll ever see in a long while, possibly ever, in official Thomas media.
No, that's very true, and it kind of is. It's a good transition episode, in my opinion.
Even in the Brenner era, like, bless them, they did try very much, but they wouldn't be able to pull a haunted Henry again because, you know, I've always felt that the higher-ups were just breathing down their necks, so they couldn't really do something. He's the kids, you know?
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing that's significant is this is kind of the first season with, at least for North American audiences, a new storyteller. And I know it's still Angelus in the UK, but even his narration changes a little bit, right? In the 8th season. And I think, I don't think the narration in both dubs necessarily changes for the better. I watched the US dub for this episode just because that's what I'm used to. And there's a line that Emily says that Michael Brandon goes, "The ghost, it got me," when the tarp falls on her. And in my mind, it's just like the delivery on that is pretty bad. Like, there are some lines, I think with the new writing and a bit of a new direction on the storytelling in both dubs that don't necessarily land as well as they might have in previous seasons of the show.
Oh, yeah. And with Michael Brandon, people just seem to find him fun to watch just for kind of how hilariously bad or how hilarious in general some of his voices are and how he delivers certain lines.
Well, again, it's just a completely different take on the storyteller than, what came before, right? Alec Baldwin and George Carlin and Ringo, I mean, had very different takes on what they were doing. And I think in this episode, it's pretty consistent. This might be, one of Michael Brandon's better ones, but there's still a few lines where I'm like, okay, but it's like, what I've noticed watching these is with Michael Brandon, it's like he's going over the top, and Michael Angelis feels like he's almost not giving it enough. There's not that middle.
He's just has the same voice that he always has when narrating, that uses the same tones for the same scenarios. And yeah, this is coming from the guy who grew up with Michael Angelis for years. Is it okay to just move on to another little scene that I wanted to talk about in my mental notes?
Absolutely.
This kind of ties into how people thought differently in different eras. Well, when the engines just come to the sheds and you see the Fat Controller has watched the whole thing, arrived at the sheds, out of the car in his pajamas, I know that back then, geography of Sodor didn't really matter at all, so they never really considered this, but with how later maps show that the Fat Controller lives at Wellsworth, can you just take into consideration how in this episode the Fat Controller had to drive all the way from Wellsworth to Titmuth in his pajamas?
Did he drive or do his drivers drive? I thought that's what his it's inconsistent even in the show whether or not he drives or his assistants drive.
Either way, he had to drive a distance.
I feel bad for his assistants.
Goodness, where does his house actually take place? Because I remember the only times I remember seeing the exterior of his manor was in this one shot in the Great Discovery when Harold just swoops in and tells him Thomas has discovered a hidden town, and the whole surrounding area is just very bushy and lots of tall trees around there, so I kind of imagined it being a good distance away from the railway line. But now this changes everything. There must be some sort of view of the railway line where the Fat Controller just saw Thomas, Emily, Harry, and Bert going past, possibly screaming from a distance at night, and then he just happens to be outside to get a good view of them.
Well, my critique of Sir Topham Hatt as an adult is he's literally in charge of this huge railway with a lot of engines, and he drives everywhere. Yeah. He never uses it. I think that's my recent concerns and complaints about Sir Topham Hatt. But I love.
In about 8 more years, that'll click eventually.
Someone will get the gist. But I want to go back to the shots, and I love that you brought up him in his pajamas, because the shot that kind of cranes up from his feet to his face, you know, like really showing off his pajamas and making it almost a reveal is hilarious. And it's like unintentionally hilarious, but it's also kind of the tone of the episode, is that this is a silly episode. And that move,
Yeah.
that crane up, that slow crane up over his pajamas just kind of adds to it. It feels like directorially this episode stands out.
It's like it's exactly the sort of scenario where a kid was just annoying another kid while the kids are just sneaking out trying to have a midnight feast.
Yeah.
And it just wakes up the parents.
So
It's exactly.
So I actually enjoyed this episode. You know, more than I think I have any other season 8 episode. I mean, it's fun if you can kind of get over, again, it's a change, right, from the seasons that came before it. It is a little bit more childish. The realism of the railway isn't taken nearly as seriously, but if you can kind of put that aside and suspend your disbelief a little bit and just allow yourself to have some fun, this is a good episode to watch.
Oh yes, it's just that sort of season where you just have to just think about, hey, maybe this episode does take place somewhere else in the timeline. You don't have to take the character arcs way too seriously. Besides that, it's just, depending on where you see it, it just makes it easy for yourself. And when you do that, or if you don't do that, it's just a very fun episode. It's got the characters right, just about to be somewhere that has a hero.
So I want to give this episode an 8 out of 10 for me, for those reasons. What are your thoughts?
Honestly, I just say a 9 out of 10 because
Wow.
the visuals, don't get me wrong, a lot of his era visuals don't really do it for me. I'm not saying that they were lazy in this era. It's just their sort of modeling style doesn't really hit home to me but it's sort of the music is a step up from what I'm used to, and the characters definitely are portrayed as good as we can get them in this era. Thomas is still cheeky, Percy is still as frightened as expected given his past experiences. Emily, well, she's Emily, she's my favourite character, so...
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Give credit to that. And Ari and Bert, yeah, they are just as naughty as they have been. And you can still see a little bit of their psychotic sort of ways in the sort of tricks that they pull in this episode, trying to do what they can with the punishment that they are given. That's how I kind of portrayed their cheekiness throughout series 6 to 7. And yeah, 9 out of 10 for me for this episode.
Lots of good
The
points.
atmosphere is the main selling point of this episode.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's a very good transition episode to go from one era to another. Now, let's move on to an episode that I don't actually think is that good. So we're going from, I think, one of the strongest of season 8 to possibly one of the weakest, but not the weakest. This episode is about a little brown tram engine. His name is Toby, and he is very old and not strong. And in this episode, Gordon just decides to bully Toby for being old and not that strong. This is You Can Do It, Toby.
One morning, Toby was delivering some milk trucks. He puffed across the island and up Gordon's Hill. Gordon's Hill was very steep. Toby puffed hard. It was a long climb. Just then, Gordon arrived at the bottom of the hill. But today the express was heavy, and Gordon had to wait for Edward to help. Bother, huffed Gordon. Soon, Edward puffed to the rescue. He buffered up behind Gordon. Edward pushed and Gordon pulled.
As has been the status quo for years, Edward has been helping Gordon at a banter on Gordon's Hill, and Toby on occasion has done that, but Gordon really doesn't think that Toby is suitable for that sort of role, and he just thinks that he is old. Way too old for this job. Way too old for anything.
Yeah, and it's interesting that's the clip that we chose because, I think this is the only time really in the hit era that I look at the Gordon's Hill shots and go, oh, those are the same angles as the classic series. Again, in this weird transition season where you're going from one era to another, and they're still kind of doing what they used to do, but doing it differently. I mean,
another part where continuity is kind of out the window because many people really do feel that there was this. Gordon's Hill was always these sort of gradient that goes up for a distance and then straight away right down. Except there was no flat part right at the top where you can just soar without gravity pulling you down either side.
Yeah, this is where that design changed because before this episode, did you ever see that kind of top of the hill?
Well, we kind of did, but it's. I remember the first thing that came to mind was that bit at the top where Gordon just went, I've done it, in Edward and Gordon, with that curve that goes up the gradient and then back down.
Now, I'm trying really hard to see these episodes from a kid's perspective because I am an adult and, of course, I'm going to think differently and I'm not the target audience.
I'll give them the benefit of the doubt in this single scene because if they did try to work with the gradients that they did try to use in later episodes, one of the single insistent, for the most part, bits of continuity in this era, it might have just been the case of difficulty working with the sort of terrain that they had to work with running shots.
But
flat surfaces might have worked a little, might have been a bit more convenient for them.
I don't understand though. Again, trying to think of this as a kid, but I'm an adult. At some point, I mean, Gordon's Hill is such a troublesome thing, and they probably lose a lot of money on the trains being delayed and having to send another. At what point do they just dig through it and make it a tunnel? And I think especially now it's in the hit era, that gradient becomes way steeper.
It is a very good point, but to be honest, I think it might just be the case where you just have to, this illusion of entertainment, where you just think that, maybe they've had more successful trips over at Gordon's Hill off screen. But to some people,
possibly,
if it didn't happen on screen, it didn't happen. To the witty users out there, how many times in the show did an engine get stuck on Gordon's Hill?
A lot. It was used all throughout the show. But my problems with this episode aren't just like Gordon's Hill. I think that's just a series-wide thing. My problems. I mean, the story of this episode is Toby is old and Thomas needs to tell him that he can do things, and Gordon bullies Toby, and Toby doesn't care, and he does it. It's kind of a boring concept. This episode...
It's not exactly a new one, but I'll give them credit for being one of those episodes where Thomas is the voice of reason as opposed to Edward.
Fair enough. But...
even here, because he is the one who's being the banker, the one that Gordon's putting on a higher pedestal than Toby.
But even as I watched this episode in preparation for doing this, the thought crossed my mind of like, wait, have I even seen this episode? Like, have I just discovered an episode of Thomas I haven't seen? But no, I saw this episode as a kid. It's just so unmemorable. And there's the plot doesn't really do, like, there's not a lot to it. Like I explained it. It's simple. Toby doesn't, he's old and Gordon makes fun of him and he has to build his confidence.
Exactly. It's the sort of thing that you might have seen before, except in episodes where other engines treat Toby as this dirty old man. He does bite back. That would have been a little better. But at the same time, I also thought about this episode taking place a little earlier in the timeline, like I said a little earlier about Series 8 episodes. This would be okay if you put it in the parts of history where Toby is still a relatively new engine. I think sometime a bit before Dirty Objects. And after Toby tries to save Gordon from the hill, it might have been just the case where Toby just grew a backbone after that, hence why he was just much more sharp when it came to dealing with James later on. But yeah, it might be a stretch to some. I don't know.
Well, no, it's a fair point. I think what's interesting to me is that it's clear, again, they're still kind of figuring out what they want to do with the show. I mean, we just talked about how great visually Halloween was, and this episode, in my opinion, really suffers visually. And the scene to me, like the big climatic point of the episode where Toby helps Gordon and shows that he is strong, shows that he is still really useful, is, visually, I don't get that at all from that scene. Like there is, like it's talking about how Toby's puffing and chuffing and it's this shot from the bottom of the hill and Percy goes past and way up at the top of the hill, like tiny in the frame, you can see the back of Toby and the storyteller's talking about how strong he is.
Funny, because I do like the shots in this scene myself, because I don't know, it's kind of the sort of scope that we get out of season 6 to 8 from episodes like this that really draw me into certain visuals. But what really brings it down here, for me at least, is definitely the music. As we just came from an episode where the music was good, right to an episode where it just went back to being really boring.
Yeah, that's the other thing is, there's just nothing special about this episode. Like visually, it's not interesting. I don't think that they did. I think there was so much more potential, especially in that big scene at the end, that they just didn't get near to achieving with the camera. I agree that the music's kind of, it's simple, right? And
we do have several other episodes where an old man tries to show his worth to young men and other engines. One of them was even in this season. Other people have talked about it earlier. Edward the Great was about an older engine beating a
I remember
younger
that
engine.
episode. That episode stands out to me from when I was a kid.
Yes, it's one of those, and that's kind of had the crux of the character choice, how they portray the characters, and how, in spite of how Tom might have pointed out that the tortoise and the hare story was used before in Jack the Pack, it was still kind of what made people really enjoy this episode more, because back then and still today they gravitate more to the engines than the Pack members. No offense to the people who worked on Jack the Pack, I still love them, but yeah, what I'm saying is that episode had that tortoise in the hair image and Edward and the better music and slightly better sets. And this episode had just Toby pulling the milk train. And
It's just not that interesting of an episode.
Jordan's Hill.
And again, I watched the US dub of this episode. Michael Brandon's Toby voice does not do that character many favors. I'm not a huge fan of Michael Brandon as Toby.
In his voice, where he this infamous scene where I've seen in memes where he gave Toby this nasally voice, like "Oh, help!" That's one scene from Saved You that I've seen.
It's not my thing. I don't know, but again, you talked about Edward the Great being such a great episode, and I think again that's one that stands out to me as a kid that I really enjoyed watching. This one I completely forget that it exists half the time.
And then there's Michelangelo's narration for I remember he gave Toby pretty much a similar voice to how he did to Percy and James in this era. Not exactly the sort of screaming sort of tone to his voice, but the same, similar pitch, similar accents.
Which is, a very notable and iconic voice, but maybe not the best voice.
Maybe I can't do it. And then episodes after, you can tell that was another bit of experimental elements, because it doesn't really speak like that later on. It just makes him a little more gentle. And I do like that.
Fair enough. Well, again, like I say, and like you say, this is a very kind of simple episode. It's been done before. I'm going to give it a 5 out of 10. What are you thinking?
Definitely 5, yeah. Yeah, that's the...
All right, we're in agreement. Virtual high five.
You can't tell, but I did a high fives the air.
I did it too. I felt it. Okay. Well, that's it for us today. These 2 episodes, Halloween and You Can Do It, Toby. We will be back. We do have a little bit more to do later on. But yeah.
Yeah. We've got a couple more episodes to do, but until then, we'll be right back after these messages.
Thanks, Christopher.
Hi, I'm Mike O'Donnell, one of the composers of the original Thomas the Tank Engine theme, and I'm here to tell you that I have released a selection of re-recorded themes and songs from the classic shows in a series of albums called the Engine Themes. These albums include a variety of classic themes and songs from the original TV series, as well as a few new compositions. You can purchase these albums on CD or digital download, as well as posters and pin badges. Have a look online at modmusic.co.uk. And for a special offer for Right On Track listeners, you can use the special code ROT20 for a 20% discount on all digital downloads. Be sure to enter the code when making your purchase. Thank you for your support and happy listening. Take care and stay safe.
Thank you to CalleyFan or Josh and Steam-Powered Cyborg or Christopher for those reviews. It's always fascinating hearing different people's perspectives on these episodes, because each of us grew up with different eras of Thomas, as the guys pointed out in this review. I grew up very much on series 1 to 6 and later 7, but other people grew up completely on the hit era. So it's really interesting to hear different opinions and different perspectives on these. Halloween is my personal favourite out of that selection. But now it's time for my segment, Loco Nation. And this one is very special. This is about a railway that's very close to my heart, the Puffing Billy Railway. And I thought, how can I capture this in such a segment. So what I did, I thought of people that I think of when I think of Puffing Billy, and I thought they were the best people to speak to. So we invited them on the podcast. We did just that, and here's some of the conversation we had. First of all, could you say your name for me, please, and what you do at Puffing Billy, and how long have you been involved?
Yeah, so my name's Chris Tasker. I'm a steam and diesel locomotive driver at Puffing Billy Railway, and my involvement, probably as a real true volunteer, started about 20 years ago. I guess I've kind of grown up on the railway and around the railway through my dad's involvement, which extends right back to 1956.
My name's Lachlan Campbell. I've been involved with the railway basically since birth. When I turned 10, I got into a junior volunteers team that was for primary and early high school age students, where we get our first real exposure to the railway, and that was doing the sort of odds and ends. So there were some train jobs like cleaning the locomotives. There were others that were things like raking up leaves and painting and all that sort of stuff. When I turned 18, I started training and became qualified as a guard. So as a guard, I direct the starting and stopping of trains, the shunting and unattended stations, and I am the ultimate person responsible for the safety and welfare of the passengers on board. And I've been doing that for about 12 years. So yeah, 20 years formally volunteering, but a lifetime of association with the railway.
So I think that speaks into how did you hear about it, but what was it, I think, extending on that for yourself, what was it like growing up, kind of being around the railway?
Yeah, I guess it was something that I kind of saw as normal, because that's what we did. Dad was involved in kind of all aspects of the railway, but particularly in the signal and telegraph division. So I've got lots of memories of going along with Dad, where he'd be working on some of the telephone exchanges and a lot of the back of house stuff that no one really sees at Puffing Billy Railway. There's all these aspects that were fairly pioneering in terms of communication technology and some signalling technology that was all tried out on the Puffing Billy Railway. A lot of the early applications of train-to-base radio and some of the signalling technologies in level crossing detection and all that sort of stuff trialled at Puffing Billy even before they were used on the big railways in Victoria and other places in Australia. So I can remember going into like little telephone exchanges under Moondara, and Dad would be working away at the telephone exchange, the PABX under there, and my sister and I would be playing around in the grounds underneath Moondara and down towards the Monbolt Creek that runs there, and also the same in the goods shed at Menzies Creek. A lot of people wouldn't even know that there is a goods shed at the up end, the Melbourne end of Menzies Creek. I do remember Dad working in there a lot on various different telephone equipment and stuff, and I remember hearing the train whistle blowing and it being like, I was that young that I was a bit frightened of the train coming in, so I'd always run around the back of the goods shed there at Menzies Creek.
I don't actually remember my first experience. I was a month old. I got a train ride. I remember, well, I'm told, I can't say I remember, but we only had one car at the time, and so Dad drove it to get to the railway in time. Meanwhile, Mum thought it would be a nice surprise to take me on a suburban train, a metro train, from where we lived at the time through to Puffing Billy, and we met Dad on the platform, and I got my first ride from there, and I guess that sort of piqued my interest. The hobby, I guess, has grown from there. So again, at the young age, sort of helping Dad clean the locos, then moving on to the more structured volunteering programs for the younger people with the interest in the place, before then moving into the more formal positions that required internal qualifications.
Can you give us a bit of an idea of a snapshot of the railway's beginnings? How did it start and where has it come up to till now?
Construction on Puffing Billy originally started in 1899. It went from Upper Ferntree Gully through to Gembrook, which was a distance of 35 kilometres. In Victoria, there's broad gauge railways of 1600 mils or 5 feet 3 inches. Puffing Billy was one of 4 or 5 experimental narrow gauge lines across Victoria that were built to a narrow gauge, of 2 foot 6 inches or 762 mils between the rails. That was done as a cost-cutting measure so that you could go up steeper hills and around tighter corners. The railway was the lifeblood of all the communities to whom it passed. So as well as carrying passengers, it would carry mail, it would carry potatoes. There were major potato growing, and there is still major potato growing that happens in the Gembrook area at the end of the line. Also timber, beer for the pub, you name it, it carried it. In the 1920s, the railway got very popular with day trippers from Melbourne, and so a fleet of dedicated excursion carriages were built. These carriages were unique in that they didn't actually have any glass in the windows. They had 2 horizontal bars, and you could sit on the sills of the carriage and dangle your legs out the side, which is a tradition that has continued for almost continuously 100 years since then. Another reason I guess the railway was so popular is because at the time the competition was the horse and cart. There was no cars or buses or trucks as we know it today. In the 1940s, however, there was. And so that was the beginning of the end, I guess, for the railway. And then in August of 1953, there was a landslide between Belgrave and Menzies Creek. And the Victorian Government Railways, who were the operators at the time, basically used that as the excuse to stop operations. This thing's losing thousands of pounds a month, and what's the point in keeping it going? In 1953, there was a competition run by one of the Melbourne newspapers at the time, the Young Sun, and it was basically giving away tickets to say one last goodbye to Puffing Billy. That one day was so successful it turned into 2, and then those 2 days turned into continuous operations for about 4 or 5 years, during which time a preservation society was formed, which still functions to this day, with the purpose of preserving Puffing Billy as it was as best as possible back in the 1910s, 1920s. 1958, it actually stopped because at that time, Belgrave, which was one of the communities that Puffing Billy served, was a major growth area. And so the Victorian Railways, who still technically owned and operated the line, made the decision to stop running Puffing Billy, but we'll look at reopening it in stages. It stopped in 1962, so we just recently celebrated our 60-year anniversary of the railway reopening between Belgrave and Menzies Creek. In 1965, it went through to Emerald, 1975 to Lakeside, and October of 1998, it opened all the way back to Gembrook again. Puffing Billy as it stands now is, I'm going to use a regulatory term because I did some work for the rail safety regulator at one point. Puffing Billy is an isolated, narrow gauge tourist and heritage steam railway. That means there's no interaction with any other railway. The end-to-end length of the track as it stands now is about 24 kilometres, and when you include passing lanes, sidings, infrastructure and all that sort of stuff, the actual route mileage that Puffing Billy is responsible for is close to 30 k's. In the years before the unprecedented times that I'm sure we all know about, Puffing Billy was carrying more than 500,000 passengers a year and was one of the 10 busiest passenger railways anywhere in Australia. And that also made it busier than some of the mainline commercial operators, such as Regional Western Australia and Journey Beyond, who operate the GAN, the Indian Pacific and the Overland.
The typical Puffing Billy locomotive is known as, I guess, amongst us, the NA class loco. Tell me about these. Like, where did they come about? How did they become Puffing Billy?
Yeah, it's probably a really interesting story. They're about an 1890s kind of era design from Auburn Locomotive Works in Philadelphia. I think the first 2 here were really started running in about 1898, I think it was. They variously had different nicknames along the way, and I think there were 4 narrow gauge lines in Victoria, and on the different lines they each had different names as well. Some of them were Hissing Ginnies or Polyland. I think Wangaratta and Whitfield they were known as the Pollies in Polyland. Somehow I think the moniker of Puffing Billy was applied to them. There was quite a few years before, I think back in probably the 1850s-ish, there was or maybe even before, in the UK there was one of the very early locomotives was named Puffing Billy, and somehow that got applied to our locomotives up in the Dandenongs. So basically the Victorian Railways procured these 2, the first 1 and 2A, One was a simple engine and two was a compound, had a Vulcan compound system on it where it used the steam twice to drive the engine forward. And they came out and there was apparently spares enough to basically build two extra ones. So 3A and 4A were built, again another simple and another compound. Eventually they decided that the compounds weren't worth the extra effort, and so they went with all simple locomotives. The other 15 of them were built by the Newport workshops.
And there's still a number of them that survive on Puffing Billy today, as well as a few other locomotives as well. Could we go through each of those?
Yeah, so I guess going through the NAs, we've got number 3A, which was one of the originals, if you like. It is now Plinth Discovery Centre at Lakeside, or what's left of it. 6A is another early one that's currently under full overhaul in the Belgrave workshops. That one was painted green, and last time it came out, they effectively backdated it as much as they could in its appearance, so that it had a lot of the early features of the locomotives that eventually were changed out over time. Bigger windows, lower bunker, ash ejectors on the smoke box, different funnel cap and a few other features. 3, 6, 8. 8A had a modified front end, so you often see there's a different funnel on that one, and it's got quite a different sound to it, to the exhaust of it. It's much more woofy. That I always remember that as being the black engine. It was Ron Picking's locomotive and always had polished up number plates and everything. Still runs around in black, but it's got the white painted number plates on it now. Then we've got 7, what some people will refer to as the real Puffing Billy, but probably because it's had quite a history and association, particularly with the Puffing Billy, the Upper Ferntree Gully to Gembrook line. And it hauled many of the trains in the preservation era, like the first train to Menzies Creek and various of those reopening trains along the way as they extended to Emerald and Lakeside and then on to Gembrook, and was quite well known. To drive it, I find it is all of the moving parts seem to be the freest moving in 7A, and I think it's had a lot of care and attention along the journey. 14, which has been converted to oil firing. So in an effort to continue operations deep into the summer months and into the fire danger period and try to reduce the fire danger from that locomotive, been fitted with an oil firing system that's very similar to those fitted to some of the Swiss locomotives. So it sounds quite a bit different, and you need to run it with the blower, so it's a bit louder along the way. But to drive, it's very nice to drive, and that's the locomotive that I did my fireman's qualification on that loco, so it kind of holds a bit of an emotional attachment for me. So that's probably the NA fleet, and then you've got the 2 Garretts, G42, which I always remember as Puffing Billy's big brother, as one of the old books used to talk about it. And that, for me, growing up, there was certainly a bit of status about it because it was brought back to the railway in the museum there, I think, in the late 60s or early 70s. And it sat there for a long time. And right throughout my childhood, I can remember that being worked on and restored. And it was one of the things that I worked on. They had these Wednesday work nights, which while I was at uni, I would go up to the workshops at Belgrave and work on the Garrett with its the kind of final steps of its restoration up there. Just doing odd jobs like painting out the cab and all that sort of stuff and cleaning things down for testing and getting it all back together. So that was a real honour to be able to drive that, and really enjoyed my time driving that one. At the moment is being taken by the South African Garrett, the NGG 16 number 129. That's something that I've driven on probably my last 3 shifts, I think, which has been a great experience getting to know it and actually seeing the kind of modern features and the design changes that happened when G42 was built in 1926 and then the NGG 16 was built, I think, about 1950. So it's quite a lot more modern than any other locos.
Yeah, no, it's amazing how diverse that range of locos are, all the railways across Victoria from South Africa. There's so much going on there.
That's it, yeah, and it was quite an exercise to convert that. That was originally running on 2 foot gauge track in South Africa, and we had to regauge it for 2'6" to run at Puffing Billy. So that was quite an exercise, moving the wheels out and all the motion and all that sort of stuff. It's credit to those involved in the design and the work in the workshops to get it all to work.
Tell us a little bit about the larger journey. So where do we start and where do we end?
So the majority of our passengers start at Belgrave. Belgrave is about 42 kilometres to the east of Melbourne, and it's nestled in the foothills of the Mount Dandenong Ranges. From there, the line heads basically east, going through Menzies Creek, which is the first major station. In Menzies Creek, there's a large museum that the railway has recently reopened, and that gives you a history of basically the railway, and there's also some unique rolling stock that you don't see anywhere else in Victoria. The railway then continues through Emerald, which is a reasonably large town, and then has a stop at the Emerald Lake Park, or Lakeside. This particular area was another real reason that the railway opened. So Carl Nobelius was a landowner, and he planted all sorts of weird and wonderful exotic plants that you generally don't see in that sort of area of the world. But the railway built a stop, Nobelius siding it was called, because he was the landowner of the time, and the plants would be loaded onto the trains to then get shipped back to Melbourne, to then be sold onto nurseries. So that unique plant species, agglomeration, whatever you want to call it, was the main reason that the Emerald Lake Park opened. There's a park, there's a lake, there's playgrounds and all sorts of weird and wonderful stuff. Really good for young families. More recently, though, the railway has opened a visitor centre. So that's got interpretive exhibitions and displays. We've got an artist at the moment who's doing Puffing Billy wildlife morphing crossover painting art, which I don't have the right words, but I hope I'm sort of painting in your mind, pardon the pun, just exactly what is going on in there. We've also got some large event spaces, so corporate people for a big day out sort of thing, tapping into the school market as well. So we're getting a lot of primary schools now that are going for a train ride from Belgrave to Lakeside, and they're learning about how railways were run, and it sort of ties in with the Australian curriculum. Very popular, I think, with sort of kids that are sort of 9, 10, 11 years old. Lakeside's about the halfway point of the line, and the line then continues through to Gembrook, which is another small town. There's a couple of nice cafes and restaurants and all sorts of stuff. And the further you get from Melbourne, the more the line opens up and the prettier it becomes. So after you leave Lakeside, you go through the Wright State Forest, which is very dense bushland. And then once you go through that and you're sort of climbing up the hill towards Gembrook, the land just opens out to the potato farms on one side. And you can sort of see some of the Victorian Alps on the other side. Take a coat because it can get very windy and very cold, but it is a very pretty area of the world.
Yeah. Leading on to that, I think you and I can both agree, like, the Dandenong Ranges, it's special. That there's no denial of that. What is it like about this part of the world? What does it do for you? Describe, like, when you go there, what's the feeling and what do you see?
I live in dense suburbia. I've got a 2-bedroom townhouse. It's nice to be able to go out there relatively close, and you've got this lovely, relatively untouched area of very beautiful scenery. And you just think, how lucky are we that we get to ride on a steam train that's 120-something years old through reasonably untouched natural beauty and see the smiles on the faces of everyone as they're going through and doing the same thing.
There must be such a rush when you're out on the line and the countryside is whizzing by. Talk me through that. What's that energy like?
That's another aspect that I really love. Once you sort of leave Belgrave, the engine is quite cool to start off with. It might sound a bit funny because you've got a hot burning fire in there, but it hasn't had much of a draft going through it, so it's not burning really brightly. It's what we kind of call a green fire, because it's just ready to start off. And as you sort of head out of Belgrave, it's basically you just pull out over the crossing, and then it's basically downhill all the way down to the Mumbolt Creek Trestle Bridge, the kind of famous Trestle Bridge. You're really under braking as you're going down the hill, And it's a beautiful spot there, running through the forest. You've got the ferns going past, and it's quite a cool and damp part of the railway. And as you're going down there, you're sort of checking that everything's running well. Your fireman will look back and he'll confirm that the train's following in a safe and orderly manner. And then you start warming through the cylinders, so you're sort of opening up the regulator and allowing a bit of steam through the cylinders to warm everything up. And then you come onto this big right-hander, and that's just before you burst out onto the trestle bridge, where there's generally, particularly in the mornings, you'll have cars lined up all on the viewing platform and everything, waiting for the train to come around so they can get all their photos and wave to their friends on the train. Yeah, it's a real joy to experience, particularly in the cab. I think we're all very, very spoiled and always quite honoured to be able to drive up there, because it's a pretty unique experience up in the cab.
What would be your advice to someone who's considering volunteering at a tourist railway or at somewhere like Puffing Billy?
Without a doubt, it'd be absolutely jump in, go and do it. There are so many aspects that you can get involved with a tourist and heritage railway, whether it be on the footplate driving, or whether it be down the other end of the train running as guard or doing a safe working. That's the operational side, but then there's countless other opportunities there. So you could be out on track, and that's a really great way to understand what goes into the infrastructure, what goes into inspecting and maintaining the whole thing. Then you've got the booking office side of things, station master, kiosk sales, or in the refreshment rooms, signal and telegraph side of things. And there's so many opportunities to get a bit of a grounding in a tourist railway, and then you can use that as a springboard into further employment, really assisting you move through life, whichever way you want to go. Having some volunteering on your resume counts a lot. Future employers, they see that you've got that ability to get up and go and put yourself out there and play a real key role in the community. So go for it.
Thank you, Lachlan, and thank you, Chris, for your insights on the inner workings of Puffing Billy. If you're interested in volunteering, we'll put a link in the episode description for where you can find out more information. It is based in the Dandenong Ranges in Melbourne, Victoria. A fantastic place to volunteer. I've done it myself for about the good part of 10 years, and I would recommend it to anyone if you're a fan of trains, if you want to get involved in your local community. It's a lot of fun, so do suss it out if it's something that you're interested in. But coming up now, we have our musical interlude. This week we got Help by One Tram Band featuring Powerful Productions. You're listening to the Right on Track podcast. We'll be back in a mo.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Lachlan's Model Railway Corner. This is part 2 of my interview with Will James. We continue talking about model railways, photography, YouTube, and all sorts of stuff like that. So yeah, let's just jump right back into it.
So how do you go about making scenery feel out at all?
So it's something I haven't actually really... Well, no, I've only just started getting into it, so I'm going to address it in a video that's about to come out. So I finished the module that I started, and I'm not that happy with it. It's fine. It's all learning. Like, that's, I guess, the big thing. It's like, I'm not going to be Luke Towan out the gate. And I think that's what we all forget. And it's something we probably should remind ourselves of. You've got to start somewhere, and you've got to, you know, foam board is quite cheap. Get some foam board, get a static grass going, get some grout, you know, do all that stuff. Make a mess, start again until you get it. And that's, yeah, I don't have the skills. Not yet. It's all practice. Like, I'm starting, I know anyone listening to this can't see this, but behind me is the new module, which is going in. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm gonna paint it brown and put some grout on it.
I suppose,
and hope it looks okay.
I suppose it's literally practice makes perfect. That's what it is. Yeah,
absolutely. So I'm no master modeler at all by any means. I just like it.
Yeah.
I think that's what something I said. I think it might have been another interview the other night. I'm like, you just get out and start. Like, buy some cheap track, buy some stuff, and start. Like, just make a little diorama. As much as we all want, you know, this multi-level layout, which goes from, I don't know, for me, I want this suburban into country scene, and, you know, it's got broad gauge and standard gauge, and it's, you know, huge. I'm never going to have that. Let's probably be realistic. But there's nothing stopping anyone making an ingle nook, I feel, or, you know, I was at the exhibition on the weekend, they had an ingle nook set up there, and it was no bigger than a dresser top. Like, it was probably a metre long. And I'm like, anyone could have that, like, surely. And I think that's what we need to stop and remind ourselves of, is just, if you want to get into it, you've got to start somewhere. And if you've got the room, if you've got the time, just have a go. And if it doesn't work, start again. And just don't buy $80 points and ruin them, like some of us have. That's it. Like, you know, I read articles. It was like, Australian prototype track should be code 83. And I'm like, oh, sweet, I'll buy a bunch of code 83. Why? I don't know. I should have bought code 100. Like, it doesn't need to be code 83. I'm not building an exhibition layout. Like, just buy normal stuff and start from there and see where you go. Like, yeah, so I guess in answer to your question, wait, it was... Oh no, what was the question?
Yeah, no, that's all good. I've watched a couple of your videos, and I put that. I thought, oh, that might be a good question to ask, because I saw what you had, and I'm seeing it now. I was like, oh crap, it's not there anymore.
No, it is. It's over the side where it was originally, and I put a bunch of static grass over it, and that was heaps of fun, and it made a big mess, and I liked all that. But nah, it's just a module. I'm not getting rid of it. It's just gonna probably just be a shunting, a little bit of what it was but not. I'm not going to have what I set out to. I started filming the new video today about where it's going, what I'm doing in here, but I've fallen off.
Probably completely unrelated, like not a segue at all, but like, what techniques can you tell us about your photography, I guess?
I'll tell you what I tell my new customers who are getting into photography. Go and take pictures. Don't worry about watching the big YouTubers, Instagrammers. Trying to think of a good... Peter McKinnon, right? Everyone watches Peter McKinnon who wants to get into photography. Great YouTube. Good photography. I'm not going to say he's the best by any means, but, you know, he comes across very well and very knowledgeable, and he is. And he sold cameras for years and years. Go and take photos. Don't worry about all the other stuff, all the accessories, all the accoutrement that goes with photography, because it's a big money pit and you can spend as much money as you want, but you might not be able to take a good picture. I see all these customers come in with like Leica M6s. You know what, 10 grand price tag without a lens, and they've bought it because it's a Leica. They don't know how to use it. And I get a lot of rail fans coming in now because they found out where I work, which is fine. I have no issue with that. And they're like, oh, I want the gear you have, or I want this massive gear and all this stuff. I'm like, why? This is your first camera, or this is your second camera. I'm like, don't worry about all that stuff. Go and take pictures. Go out, go through your settings, go practice. I get a lot of, especially younger photographers, like, oh, the sun's in the wrong spot, or this isn't fully in focus, or all these like things that a lot of people nitpick about railway photography for some reason. I say just post it. Post your photo. You went and took the photo, post it. Like, I look at a lot of older photos, like, historical photos from, I don't know, from when cameras started to, early digital, and they might not be technically this amazing photo or anything, but they're interesting. And if they hadn't posted it, then we wouldn't know about it. Like, just take pictures, post them, and the best thing that someone looking at them can do is give them positive feedback. That's the other side of it. I see a lot of negativity about, for example, the sun issue. Like, oh, the sun's on the wrong side, or the front of the loco's not lit up as well as the side. Who cares? Yeah, that person went out and took the photo. Cool, good. Like, good on you for going and doing it. And I think that's the better takeaway, is just, go and take photos. Go out, pick your day. Cool, I'm going to go to, I don't know, for us in Melbourne, I'm going to go to Jakarta. You can smash through photos there. You've got broad gauge and standard gauge that diverge together there. You're going to have a field day. Go and do it. Just go practice. You don't even have to take photos of trains. Just take your camera, go and take photos. That is my best advice. Don't worry about your gear as long as you've got it. If all you've got's a phone, it's a good enough starting point. You can get reasonable photos off a phone. I'm a big stickler for when people come in and say, oh, why would you buy a camera? It's not as good as a phone. Real camera, much better. But if you can't afford one, it's okay. If you've got a phone, you've got a camera. Go and take pictures. Start there. You can learn rule of thirds, or if you want to get technical, you can learn a Fibonacci sequence to take your photo. Cool. Good start. There we go. My best advice, go and take pictures.
Literally, just... What was that meme, Shia LaBeouf? Just do it! Yeah.
It really is.
Just go do it.
That's the thing. Like I said, like, people come in, they get so hung up on gear and, what's the best camera and what's the best video camera and all this stuff. And I'm like, don't worry about it. Just get something, like, that you can take pictures with.
Yeah. It seems to be the advice you have for, what was it before we were just discussing? Scenery as well.
The scenery.
Just do it.
Same answer. Just go and do it.
Have a go.
Like, you don't have to go and get the best gear. You don't have to go and get the premium ground flock or ballast or paints and all this other stuff. Just get what is in your budget, what you can afford, what you can start with, and just start. Like, don't worry about... This is, I guess, part of the problem with social media is that we're quite easily potentially led astray, that we do need all this gear, but just go and start. If you want to do it, don't worry about other people, or if you might get some negative feedback or something, just go and do it. Even if you don't, you don't have to tell anyone. Like, if you're really, really self-conscious or anything, but if that's the takeaway for both questions, go and do it.
Yeah. So, what was the inspiration for the layout you are building up at the moment?
I would say the current inspiration is just to have something. I need a background for my videos. That's one part of it. The other part is I do need something to film reviews with. So I just need a nice scene that looks good when I photograph it. I needed something that's portable. Now the new one that, once again, I know this is a podcast, no one can see what is sitting behind me, but you can. This whole green thing back here just lifts up the whole thing. I can pick up, take outside. If anyone here watches Ken Patterson, for example, What's Neat This Week podcast, which is a video cast, that's how he builds his layouts. It's just, they're all removable, and that's kind of what I have to go with at the moment. So that's its purpose. inspiration-wise, I like suburban, I like city, I like urban, which is why a lot of photos and videos, especially at the moment, that you see of real trains are suburban. And it's not just because it's convenient to where I live. I like that. I like that, people usually see freight trains, for example, regionally. Well, they've got to start from somewhere. And yeah, I think that's kind of what I want is suburban, like that mix of suburban and regional. But yeah, I like industry. I like that kind of thing. So I think, getting away from kind of that question about like what's the inspiration about the current stuff, for now, it's honestly just learning. It's still learning how wiring works. Like the module I built in the YouTube video is overwired. Like I've got way too many wires on it. Like I could have done it by about half, and it's a mess. The new one, it'll be nice and neat, and I'll have it a bit better. And that's part of that learning curve about learning what works and what doesn't. But if I was, to build a big layout, it would be suburban to regional, but with a nice big focus on suburbia. Like, depending on how familiar your listeners are with the Victorian model railway scene, there's a model railway that gets around a layout called Town and Country, which is set in a fictional part of Melbourne, and it has a single line, I think it's single line working suburban line with a freight line as well, and it's really good. And I'm like, that's what I really like, and that's some sort of inspiration. Like the new module, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen the video that's currently not out, it'll have catenary and it'll have that, but that's not the focus of it. But I like that mix.
Something that kind of captures a little bit of everything, all the freight, all the suburban trains, regional stuff. Yeah, that's a good idea.
I think something that like we never saw in our lifetime, which our parents would have seen, was suburban freight. Like, and I think that's, you still see it in the States and you see it in parts of Europe, but you don't see it here. The closest thing we have in Melbourne is the Saddler's transfer for like or maybe the Apex or the cement train. But it used to be like quite common. Like you just had an E or an L going to a suburban siding. That we don't have that anymore because we have trucks and that kind of thing. And I really like that. And I kind of wish, I think if I was to build something, I'd like to capture that.
Okay, yeah. That I like that. Yeah.
What do you model? You got British mainly.
Yeah, I have a lot of British stuff. Sort of. So with British, they have it in different eras. So you got era 1, which is your pioneering, very early stuff, right up to I think it's era 11 now, which you got all your current stuff.
Right.
I'm kind of the period 3 and 4. So kind of the merging of the what's the word? The liquidating of all the smaller companies into the big 4. Big British companies, and
is
then
it the consolidation period or whatever?
I think it's called that. But I want to go from the start of that, which is like 1923, right up to the very end, where just before they grouping. That's it, and then privatization. I think the British Railway era was called. Yeah. So at the moment, I've got a lot of I don't like follow a suit. I just like, I like that one. I'm going to get it. I don't have a particular idea of what to get.
Nothing wrong with that.
Nothing wrong with that at all. No.
Absolutely. I think that's good.
Yeah.
Do you want to get into Australian stuff more? Because I know you bought the 38 and you bought the D3.
I bought the 38. I've bought both 38s actually, and the D3. Got my eye on the J at the moment. I might.
You might want to move pretty quick.
Yeah,
not many left.
They're going. I've seen a few.
Well, apparently, rumour is it'll be a second run, but I don't know how much true. I don't know how.
I hope. I guess.
I think a lot of people missed out on numbers that they wanted.
That was a thing.
There's a few dress-up kits to be. Go on.
Yeah, mostly for me because it was probably the most well-known thing, and it was probably the most easy successful though as well because I collect a lot of Hornby stuff, which again nothing wrong with that. If you're a fan of it, go for it, and it's cheap as well.
They're well made. bang for your buck. Like, I mean, I guess that's the difference between us and them is, they have a much bigger scene than we do, and a lot more people buying it. Hence, why they can keep their costs down.
Yeah,
even with shipping to get it out here. Like,
did
I understand that.
Did you see the 2022 range?
I have watched. It's the magazine. It's Hornby magazine or whatever it is. I watched their announcement, and I mean, that's great. That's great that they can announce that much. I understand the pricing increase.
Yeah,
they've still got it better than we do. Like, their pricing is better than ours.
Still, somehow, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, speaking like with the new, like my news, when I speak to manufacturers, that's usually on the phone. Is the one of the first things I'll say is just manufacturing is not good at the moment. And
no.
Hence why we've got such massive delays, or the price rises are happening, and unfortunately there's nothing they can do. And then that's without even looking at the shipping issue, depending on how much they're shipping. So it was inevitable. It's unfortunate.
Not a lot you can do.
It's out of their hands. That's I don't know them, and I can't vouch for Hornby, for example, but I feel like it's them, no different to the manufacturers I speak to. It's out of their hands. It comes down to the manufacturer rather than them.
Yeah.
Oh well. They're still producing it, which is great. It might mean, I guess, I don't know. They've got a basics range though, which is something we don't have.
That's what
anymore.
I feel like Australia Railway Models is going to be. It's going to be like...
Well, absolutely.
Yeah, it's going to be our version of the Hornby Railroad. Because I mean, yeah...
Well, Lima's back producing New South Wales Railway Coach, which is Hornby.
True, yeah.
Which didn't used to be. I mean, when I was growing up, Lima was, an affordable model. Like, you could buy West Coast Railways B classes, you could buy GMs, you could buy S's, you could buy a few other bits and pieces that were close enough. They weren't prototype, and they weren't as good as some of the others, but they were affordable. Nowadays, the closest is ARM. But you don't have that for the diesels so much. Like, Austrains, I think, was the closest for a while. They had a basics range, which was the C classes, and the others, which is now Austrains Neo, which is SDS, because they bought the tooling. But even then, they're still... I think they've gone up a bit. Don't quote me on that, but I feel like they have gone up in price a bit, even though it's old. They're old models, like they're old tools, they're old molds. So
yeah, that's the thing I kind of don't understand is how they re-release old tooling, but then they up the price. It might be because it's some sort of enhanced detail, like with printing, or I don't know, maybe better quality material. Who knows?
I don't know, and sometimes I don't feel it's. I think it might come down to something like shipping, and I understand inflation and that kind of thing happens. Working in the camera industry, I guess I see it a lot. Camera gear has gone up in the last 2 years by quite a bit, due to a number of reasons, and they might be lenses that have been produced for the last 20 years, and they've had to go up, and unfortunately, just how it is. So yeah, I saw Hornby's announcement. I saw their everyone's reaction to it. I think nicest way to put it.
Still gonna try and maybe get one or two from this year.
Well, I noticed with a lot of the British sellers, like you'll have Hornby come out, or Bachmann, or Acura Scale, or all the others. They come out with an RRP, but the second they come out, you have other businesses over there selling them for quite a bit less. Like, they seem to have sales a lot more than what our manufacturers have. I mean, once again, I realise there's a lot less competition here than there is there, but yeah, I don't know. I guess if you really want it, you'll jump on it straight away, because nowadays things are getting produced in a lot more limited quantities.
That's right, and you got to compete with scalpers and whatnot as well. Yeah,
absolutely. But then you also have the rise of 3D printing. That's the other side of it. Like, it's kit building has kind of shifted. Like, I mean, I don't think kit building will ever go away, but 3D printing now, it's like, oh, this rolling, maybe not so much for locomotives so much, but for rolling stock, it's like, oh, I really like this I don't know, van. Oh, they've sold out. Oh, someone's put a 3D print up on Thingiverse, and I've got a 3D printer, or my mate's got a 3D printer. Like, you've now got that aspect of it. So I wonder where that's going to start affecting how manufacturers release things, or
how they're going to compete with that. Yeah,
that might be looking too far into it, but
yeah. So you're part of I always forget the name of it. AMRA, Australian Model Railway Association. Yeah, Australian Model Railway Association. You're part of that club down in Melbourne, right?
Yes, I am. I've been in AMRA for the last 4-ish years. We used to go there when I was a kid for their open days a lot. Not a lot, annually. And yeah, then when I got back into it, I was like, oh, which club should I join? And I joined them. They put on the bigger exhibition. Seemed to me logical. They offered a lot more days that I could be down there or that appealed to me. And yeah, I've been with them and quite enjoy it.
Yeah. What else is there you can tell us about the club? Like anything special that they do? Or
So we've got 2 permanent layouts. We've got HO scale layout, which is Stonington Valley. It's an ambiguous layout. It's not quite American, it's not quite English, and it's not quite Australian. There's elements of all 3, although I would say if I had to pick one, majority of it is Australian with a touch more American. It's quite large. And then we have a G-scale layout outside. I don't have G-scale or Livesteam as much as I want it. I cannot afford it, but one day maybe. We've got one outside, and then we've got a couple of exhibition layouts being Maryborough, which is set in the 60s, which is spectacular. The station is
I think I've seen
incredibly well built. It's a very fragile layout, so it doesn't come out very often. Hopefully you'll see it this year, hopefully. Then we've got Murray, which has been on the exhibition scene for, I want to say 20 to 30 years. Been around a while. It's just a tail chaser, which is set on, I guess, kind of bordery. Like it's Victoria meets New South Wales, Victoria meets South Australia. It's a bit ambiguous in that respect. We have an annual exhibition, which is at Caulfield, which will be in August this year. It's probably, I don't quote me on this, but it's probably one of the biggest in Australia. I don't want to say it's the biggest because I think Sydney might have the biggest, but it's quite large. It's out at Caulfield Racecourse. It's a pretty big draw card for most modelers. A lot of layouts. It's a big venue. Then we have our main layout, which is the HO one, which I guess I'm there the most for. It is DC and DCC. We can switch between the 2. So you'll have days where it's themed, for example, DCC Australian or DC American or DCC British or DC American Steam. Yeah, so on the website there'll be a breakdown of what is running what days. And then we have juniors as well, which is, I guess, under 18s. You can come down. It's all supervised. Run trains. Learn how to operate the layout. It is advised, if you are a younger person, to go to that first. So when, you get a bit older, you know how the layout works. But if you're an adult and you want to join, you can come down. I can speak on behalf of the DCC crew. We're pretty easygoing. So if you want to come down and have a chat, have a look around, I think nowadays you can. There was a period there where you couldn't, but that's us. That's the club.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've definitely myself wanted to go and check it out at some point because from what I've seen,
you're more than welcome to. You do have to be a member to run trains, but if you are interested, look, I can give you a controller. You'll be all right. It's pretty casual. We're pretty relaxed. We're all a pretty young bunch. Not too strict. About everything. So it's easy going, man.
Yeah. Well, that sounds pretty cool. Yeah.
I treat it. I feel like it's more of a social club more than anything. I used to bring boxes and boxes of trains and put them all out on the track and be like, Yeah, and then just not end up running more than half. They end up just talking to someone or people.
Currently, the problem I have, I'll pack everything into a box and take it and just run 2 trains.
Yep. Well, I've learnt that not the hard way, but now I just take one. I'm just like, yep, I'm going to bring this consist along, and I'm just going to run that and have a chat. And that's like my favorite part of it. It's a social club. It's social interaction and like-minded people. It doesn't matter what background you come from, anything like that. You're there for one reason. You're not there to talk about anything else that's going on. Well, and that's it. And that's why I like it.
Yeah, kind of the point of like everyone I talk to who isn't part, like they collect model trains but isn't part of a club. I always try to encourage them to get involved with something like that because it's good. It's good for it not only learning about model trains and playing with model trains, but you make friends and whatnot as well. It's definitely something I do want to take a deeper dive into at some point on this podcast.
Like, I've been able to, if I've got stuck with something, whether it's programming or I've wired something wrong, I've now got people I can just call, text, and just be like, hey, what's wrong with, what have I done wrong? Or like, how do I fix this? Or how did you do that? And I've got, those people are all there now. I mean, we do live in a world of social media and there's Facebook groups, but sometimes, you get, it's not always the most helpful. But with the club, I don't know, I found some good mates, and I can't recommend enough, like you just said, for other people, join your local club. Go down there, have a chat.
And it's a thing now more than ever because of isolation. We're going to be, well, not really anymore, but not really getting out and socializing. There's no better excuse to get out and talk to people.
Absolutely.
Do you perhaps have any advice for younger people getting into, or people just starting to get into Australian model railways in any form?
Yeah, don't be put off by the price. You can look at the stuff that, I'm a little bit older now and I've got a full-time job and I don't have, I can spend the money on this and you look at social media, I'm like, I bought a D3 the other day and that's great. I'm an adult, I can do that. If you're a younger person and you follow people like me or anyone else, don't think that you have to buy that stuff. You do not. Start basic. I started with a lifelike kit, one of the ones that came in a box for Christmas. Had a Australian National GM, which was like I'm going to get it wrong, an F7, one of the American Streamliners. They're way too short to be a GM, and like a Twisties van and some other stuff. And it was, it's just toy, but that's what you start with.
You know what? I think I actually have that one laying about somewhere. That was one of my first sets
I keep
as well.
needing to bring it down because I'm like, I've still got it, and I'm like, well, I had to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And you look at, I look at some older modelers or even people my own age who have got far bigger collections than mine, and I'm like, oh man, that'd be great. But I know, I'll get there eventually, got other things to do. So for younger modelers, my best suggestion, if you've got a club near you that does juniors like ours does, join it. If they don't have juniors and, you've got to go down to parent, go down there with parent. If you can't do that, find a way. Find a way to get into it. But don't be put off by the investment. Like, I get a lot of people saying, I'd love to get a DCC, but it costs too much. Cool. My club does DCC. It didn't cost me any extra to go and use their set until I could find. I bought a second-hand set. Like, that's the other thing. Like, you don't have to buy brand new. People are always switching stuff. Like, it's not that much can go wrong with a model train. Realistically, like, you can go and test them. So second-hand stuff, it's always there. Always where I buy second-hand. That's always a good tip. But start basic. We're not all going to have a huge collection out the gate. You've got to start somewhere. So if you can save up for your first loco and some rolling stock, cool. And that's the other thing. Buy rolling stock. Don't just buy locos, because it's great having 27 locos and 4 carriages, but it should be the other way around. Like, don't get carried away with the new releases. And it kind of sucks because a lot of the new releases are limited.
What can we expect to see from Will James in 2022?
So I think what you'll see for this year, you'll see a lot more trip reports. I've got 3 booked for next month alone. So that's riding heritage trips. You'll see a lot more exhibition coverage. Obviously, you'll still see the Model Railway news come out at the start of every month, as that's probably the most popular. You'll see the compilations of trains I catch throughout the month. That'll keep coming out the week after the news comes out. I'd love to start doing more, or actually start doing layout tours. That was all kind of good to go last year, but then COVID happened again, and that all got thrown under the bus. Hopefully that comes out. So yeah, layout tours is something I really want to do, is because it's like you see them in the magazines. It's great. I'd like to showcase them a bit more in depth, show off more of what people have created. I think you'll also see, I'd like to start doing interviews, maybe with people who are really good at weathering or really good at scenery, and just maybe try and interview them or shoot a video with them if they're not comfortable with talking to a camera. I totally understand that. It can be very daunting. But like show people, oh, this is how this person does it, and it's not that hard. And because yeah, you read a lot of articles or see videos like, oh, you need to have all this gear, you need the airbrush, and well, how do you use the airbrush? How do you use the airbrush? I wouldn't mind doing more interviews. I think that's something I'd like to do maybe later on. But at the moment, trip reports, news, exhibitions, reviews. I've got a couple I'm working on. Hopefully a few more in the year, depending on what comes out, what I purchase. So should be quite a bit of content, I guess, on the way.
Right, yeah, it definitely sounds like some pretty exciting stuff that you got in the pipeline.
Hopefully.
Yeah, hopefully. Where can we find you?
You can find me on YouTube. That is probably one of the easiest ways. You can, if you just go Will James Railways, it comes up as the first search. You can find me, I have a website, which is willjamesrailway.com. That's got all my photos. It's got a blog. It's got merch. If you after any railway gear, I've got Facebook and Instagram. Same thing. Will James Railway just comes up. Yeah, that's the easiest way to find me.
Right, cool. Everyone, make sure to go check out Will James. He's got some good stuff happening. Thanks for coming on. Thank you for being.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having letting me ramble on for about stuff. Plus, I feel like I didn't mention Thomas enough, which is isn't that what I'm supposed to be talking about?
Not really.
That's okay. I'm just double checking. Like I feel like I was like, if you ever notice in the background of my videos, I've got a James.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, there is a James behind me.
I thought,
it's a money thing. It's a
piggy bank.
Yeah, it's like an enamel one.
I saw that. I'm like, does he have that because his name is James?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Kind of made sense, but yeah.
I suppose we'll finish off with that. Will James, thank you very much for coming on.
Not a problem. Thank you very much for having me.
And that was my chat with Will James. I definitely hope to have him back on at some point in the very near future. Maybe when he's reaching another milestone, I don't know. But thank you so much, Will James, for coming on. You may hear more from him. You definitely will hear more from him in the future. I caught up with him at my local model railway exhibition, and I'm hoping to get that done, and then we can get that out there. He travels around to all sorts of model railway exhibitions, talks to people, takes videos. He's always a great chat, always good to have a chat to. He will be back on, hopefully, for another one I've got lined up, but like for a proper interview. Congratulations to 5,000 subscribers, and thank you so much for everything you've done in not only the Australian model railway community, but the Victorian model railway and just general railway community, Will. Thank you so much for all the work you do. And with that, I will see you guys next time on another podcast episode. Thank you. See you later.
Thank you, Lachlan, for that awesome segment. And thank you, Will James, for coming onto the podcast. It was great to have you on board and great to shine some light more on some of the Australian end of the model train community. And that's all we got time for episode 68 of Right on Track. But tune in for episode 69, where you won't guarantee when it will be, but it will be fun. I'm sure of that. I've been Tom Denham, and this has been the Right on Track podcast. See you later.
You've been listening to Right on Track. This podcast was hosted by Connor Jonas, Tom Parry, Lachlan Kyle, and Tom Denham. The audio producers for this podcast were Jason Evans, Harry Hughes, Ashley DeGroot, and Frederick French Pounce. The supervising producers are Connor Jonas and Tom Parry. The executive producer is Tom Denham. Visit rightontrackpodcast.org for more information plus bonus material, and be sure to follow us on social media. On Facebook at facebook.com/rightontrackthomaspodcast, on Twitter at OnTrackThomas, and Instagram at RightOnTrackPodcast.